The restaurant went quiet before I did. I was sitting at the head of a table set for 18 people, wearing the dress my grandmother saved 3 months to buy me, holding a glass of sparkling cider I hadn't touched yet, when my mother stood up, cleared her throat, and slid a folded piece of paper from her clutch like she'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks. But she had. I just didn't know it yet. She looked around the table, at my aunts, my uncle, my father, my best friend who I'd invited because I thought this was a celebration, my thesis advisor who my mother had personally called and told this was a special dinner, and she said, "Before we order, there are some things this family needs to say to Sophie. Not happy graduation. Not we're proud of you. Not congratulations on finishing 4 years of nursing school while working 30 hours a week and sending money home every single month. Just, there are some things this family needs to say." I was 23 years old. I had graduated that morning. And my mother had just turned my celebration dinner at Ramsey's Steakhouse in Lexington, Kentucky into the most humiliating night of my life. Or so she thought. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the phone sitting face down next to my bread plate had been recording for the last 47 minutes. And everything they were about to say was already saved in a folder I'd labeled very simply, "just in case." That night for relationships ended. 2 of them weren't even mine to end. And the woman who planned the whole thing lost something she will never get back. This is the story of how the best day of my life became the night my family finally showed me exactly who they were, and how I made sure every single person at that table saw it too. Before we go any further, if this kind of story is something you connect with, real, raw, and told without apology, please take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell. I'm going to keep telling these stories as long as people need to hear them. Now let me take you back to where this really started, because what happened at that dinner didn't begin that night. It started years earlier in a house in Lexington with a mother who had very specific ideas about what a daughter owed her family. My name is Sophie Castellan. I'm 24 years old. I'm a newly licensed registered nurse at the University of Kentucky Albert B. Chandler Hospital, and I grew up in a 3-bedroom house on the east side of Lexington with my parents, my younger brother Cole, and a very clear understanding of the family hierarchy. My mother, Lorraine Castellan, was at the top of it. Everyone else arranged themselves accordingly. Lorraine is the kind of woman who runs every room she walks into, not because she's the loudest, but because she's the most prepared. She shows up to school events with laminated agendas. She volunteers for every church committee and somehow always ends up chairing them. She has an opinion about everything and delivers it with the calm certainty of someone who has never once considered she might be wrong. Growing up, I thought that confidence was strength. It took me a long time to understand that what I was actually watching was control dressed up in a blazer. My father, Dennis, is the opposite. Quiet, agreeable, the kind of man who says, "Whatever your mother thinks is best." So often it stopped being a phrase and became his entire personality. He's not a bad man. He's just never learned how to take up space in his own house. That job belonged to Lorraine and she never let anyone forget it. I was the eldest. That came with a specific set of expectations. Good grades, no drama, set an example, make us proud. I did all of it. I graduated high school with honors, got into the University of Kentucky's nursing program on a partial academic scholarship, and spent the next 4 years doing what I'd always done, performing for an audience that rarely applauded. Cole, my brother 2 years younger, was the one who got the applause. Cole was funny, charming, and could talk his way out of anything. When Cole failed his junior year statistics class, Lorraine called the professor. When I dropped a single elective to manage my clinical rotation schedule, Lorraine asked me if I was sure nursing was really the right fit. Cole's mistakes were obstacles the family helped him over. Mine were character flaws. Here's what my financial life looked like by the time I hit my final year of school. I was working 3 shifts a week as a patient care technician at the hospital while carrying a full course load and completing clinical hours. My take-home pay after tuition top-ups was around $900 a month. Out of that, I was sending $250 home every month because, as Lorraine explained it, the family budget was tight and I was working so I should contribute. Cole, who was living at home and working part-time at a sporting goods store, contributed nothing. When I pointed this out once gently over the phone, Lorraine told me that Cole was still finding himself and that I shouldn't make everything about money. I want you to hold on to that phrase. She'll use it again. By the time graduation morning arrived, I had been awake since 5. I pressed my own dress, drove myself to the ceremony, walked across that stage and shook the dean's hand. I was proud. Genuinely, quietly, deeply proud. The best phone call of my life was with my grandmother, Nana Rose, from that parking lot afterward. She cried. I cried. Then I drove to Ramsey Steakhouse on Newtown Pike, where my mother had made a reservation for 18 people and told me to dress nicely because the family wanted to celebrate. I believed her. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was inviting my best friend Daniela Cruz without warning her what she might be walking into. We'd survived 4 years of nursing school together, and she had just matched at a hospital in Cincinnati. I wanted her there because she was the one person who actually understood what graduating meant to me. My third mistake was assuming that because my thesis advisor, Dr. Patricia Wynn, had come out of genuine professional kindness, my mother would behave. I had forgotten something important about Lorraine. She never behaves. She performs. And a bigger audience only improves her material. I arrived at 6:45. The table was already half full. I hugged Aunts, kissed Nana Rose's cheek. She held my face in both hands and said, "There she is. There's my girl." That was the last uncomplicated moment of the evening. Lorraine was at the far end talking to Dr. Wynn with the focused warmth of someone running a quiet interview. Cole sat beside her scrolling his phone, unbothered as always. Dennis was quiet in his chair, working on a bread roll like it required his full attention. I sat down. The waiter came around. I let myself breathe for the first time all day. I'd done it. 4 years, 2 jobs, 1,000 small sacrifices, and I had actually done it. I let myself feel it for exactly 11 minutes. Then Lorraine stood up. She didn't tap a glass. She just rose from her chair with that piece of paper already in her hand and waited for the table to notice her, which took about 4 seconds because that's how long it takes a room to understand that Lorraine Castellan has something to say. "Before we order," she began, her voice smooth and measured, the voice she saves for church announcements and parent-teacher conferences, "I think it's important that we take a moment as a family. Sophie, honey." She looked directly at me. "We love you. But love means being honest. And there are some things we've been holding back for too long." The table went still. Dr. Wynn set down her water glass. Daniela's eyes found mine and I saw it in her face, confusion tipping fast toward alarm. Uncle Gerald shifted in his seat. Nana Rose's expression didn't change, but her hand moved slowly to the edge of the table and gripped it. I sat very still. My phone was face down beside my bread plate. The recording app had been open since I got out of the car, a habit I'd started 3 weeks earlier for reasons I'll explain in part 2. I had not expected to need it this soon. But the red bar was already pulsing. Lorraine told the table I was selfish. That I had always prioritized my own ambitions over the family's needs. That my decision to pursue nursing instead of staying closer to home and contributing more had put a strain on everyone that nobody felt safe enough to name until tonight. She said I had a pattern of making my achievements about myself rather than the people who raised me. She said my attitude around money had affected Cole's confidence and Dennis's peace of mind. She said all of this in front of Dr. Patricia Wynn, my thesis advisor. At a restaurant where other diners 2 tables over had gone quiet to listen. On the night of my graduation. Then she sat down, folded her paper, placed it back in her clutch and picked up her menu like she'd just finished saying grace. I looked at my phone. The waveform was still moving. I looked at Daniela. Both hands flat on the table. Jaw tight. I looked at Nana Rose. She was watching Lorraine with an expression I had never seen on her face in 23 years. I picked up my water glass and took a long, slow sip. Because Lorraine thought she had just opened this evening. She had absolutely no idea she had just handed me the ending. 3 weeks before that dinner I almost didn't start recording at all. I want to take you back to a Tuesday evening in early May, because that's where the real story begins. Not at the restaurant, not at the graduation ceremony, but in the hallway of my parents' house on a night I stopped by unannounced to drop off a birthday card for Cole. The front door was unlocked the way it always is, and I let myself in through the side entrance off the kitchen. I could hear voices coming from the living room. Mom and someone else. I assumed it was Aunt Renata, her older sister, who stopped by most Tuesdays. I was already pulling off my jacket when I heard my name. Lorraine's voice, flat and certain the way it gets when she's made a decision that isn't up for discussion. "Sophie thinks this is all about her degree. She's been like this since high school. Everything she does, she turns into a referendum on herself." Pause. Then Aunt Renata's voice, lower, slower. "So what are you thinking?" And Lorraine said, "The graduation dinner." Dennis already agreed. We invite everyone, make it look like a celebration, and then we tell her exactly what this family has been dealing with. In front of people she respects. People she won't want to embarrass herself in front of. Renata asked, and if she gets upset? Lorraine didn't hesitate. Then everyone in that room sees exactly what we've been talking about. I stood in that kitchen for a long time after the voices moved on to other things. I didn't drop the card on the counter. I didn't call out to announce I was there. I backed out the way I came in, got into my car and sat in the driveway with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel. Here is what I felt in that moment, and I want to be honest because I think people expect anger and that's not what it was. It was recognition. The specific, cold clarity of understanding something you'd always half known but never let yourself fully see. Every time I'd been talked over at Sunday dinners, every time my accomplishments disappeared like stones dropped in water, every time Lorraine redirected conversations back toward Cole or herself, it wasn't accidental. It was a pattern she'd just told her sister exactly how to use. I called my college roommate Priya Anand from that driveway. Priya is now a paralegal at a firm in Louisville, and she is the most pragmatic person I have ever met. I told her what I'd heard word for word. She didn't gasp, didn't tell me I was overreacting, didn't try to find the charitable interpretation. She listened until I finished, and then she asked me 2 questions. First, do you have somewhere to be in the next 30 minutes? No. Second, do you still have that audio app on your phone from the clinical documentation seminar last year? I did. It was a legal recording application the hospital used for patient consent training. I'd never deleted it. Kentucky is a one-party consent state, Priya said. You're present in every conversation you're part of. Open the app before you walk into that house from now on. She paused. And Sophie, don't tell anyone else yet. Not even Daniela. I looked it up that night. He was right. I wasn't setting a trap. I was protecting myself from one. There is a difference, and I need you to understand that, because what I found over the next 3 weeks was never something I went looking for. I just stopped showing up unarmed. The first Sunday after the hallway, nothing unusual. Lorraine made pot roast. Cole arrived 20 minutes late and found a plate kept warm on the stove. Dennis watched a pre-game show until Lorraine called him to the table 3 times. Standard Castellan evening. The app recorded an hour and 12 minutes of ordinary family noise. The second Sunday was different. Lorraine had been on the phone before I arrived. I could tell by the way she carried herself when I walked in, too composed, the way she gets when she's managing something. We ate dinner. Afterward, while Dennis and Cole went to the garage, I stayed in the kitchen finishing dishes. Lorraine sat at the table going through mail. And she started talking, not directly to me, more in my direction, the way she does when she wants to say something but maintain deniability about having said it at all. I spoke to your Uncle Gerald today, she said, sorting envelopes. He asked about the dinner reservation. I told him it was going to be a meaningful evening. Not just a party. I kept my hands in the soapy water. She set down an envelope. I also called Patricia Wynne. I turned off the faucet. I turned around slowly. I introduced myself. Told her we were putting together something special for you. She seemed happy to come. She picked up the next envelope. I mentioned you'd been under a lot of stress lately. That the family had some concerns. Her expression stayed pleasant. Just that you've been distant. That you've been struggling with priorities. Nothing she wouldn't understand as an educator. She went back to her mail. I just wanted her to come in with context. I walked to the bathroom and stood over the sink for 90 seconds. Dr. Wynne had written my letter of recommendation. She had mentored me through my thesis and gone out of her way to attend a student's graduation dinner on a Thursday evening. And Lorraine had called her ahead of time to preload a narrative about my struggles and my attitude so that when the evening went the way Lorraine planned, Dr. Wynne would already be halfway convinced. This wasn't a dinner anymore. This was a setup with professionally laid groundwork. I texted Priya that night. 4 words. She called Dr. Wynne. Priya called back in 3 minutes. After I explained everything, she said something I've thought about many times since. Sophie, your mother isn't doing this because she's angry at you. She's doing this because she needs an audience, and you're the most credible threat to her version of events. The intervention isn't about correcting you. It's about establishing a record before you can establish yours. The 3rd week I found something I genuinely wish I hadn't. A Wednesday late afternoon. I'd stopped by to pick up a sweater I'd left the previous Sunday. The house was quiet. Lorraine's car was in the driveway but I couldn't hear her. I grabbed my sweater from the hook by the back door and was already turning to leave when I heard her voice upstairs. Bedroom door half open, not bothering to keep her volume down because she didn't know I was there. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. My phone was already recording. Gerald, I'm telling you the $250 she sends every month isn't the point. The point is she sends it and then acts like it makes her better than us. A pause, then Gerald's muffled response. Doesn't it kind of help though? Lorraine made a short, dismissive sound. It's $250. Dennis and I have been raising these kids for 23 years. She sends $250 a month and expects a standing ovation every Sunday. Another pause. What does Dennis think about the dinner plan? And Lorraine said, clear as anything, Dennis will go along with it. He always does. I told him Sophie needs to hear some hard truths and he said whatever I think is best. He hasn't read what I wrote. He'll read it at the table. I heard that last sentence and something went very still inside me. Dennis hadn't written anything. Lorraine had written something and planned to hand it to her own husband at a restaurant in front of 18 people and let him read it aloud without him knowing what it said beforehand. She hadn't just planned this intervention. She had scripted it, cast it, and assigned roles without telling the other actors what they were performing. I walked to my car. I opened my recordings folder. 3 files. The hallway. The kitchen. This one. I sat in the driveway looking at them on my screen and thought about Lorraine at that restaurant table, Dennis holding words he'd never read, Dr. Wynne already primed, 18 people watching something built to take me apart on the one night it would hurt the most. Then I drove home, made dinner, and set my alarm for 5 a.m. because I had a clinical shift in the morning and I refused to let any of this touch the one part of my life Lorraine had never managed to reach. But I did make one decision that night. I called Priya and asked her to be at that dinner. Not just for support, I needed someone in that room who knew what was on my phone. She said she'd be there. Then she said almost quietly, Sophie, I don't think she knows what she's starting. I looked at my recordings folder one more time before I turned off the light. 3 files. 6 days until graduation. And Lorraine Castellan had no idea the dinner she'd spent weeks engineering was going to end in a way she never wrote. Let me step outside the story for a moment. Sitting in that driveway with 3 recordings on my phone and 6 days until the dinner, I had a choice that felt simpler than it probably should have. I could cancel. I could call Lorraine and tell her I'd made other plans, take Daniela out somewhere quiet, celebrate on my own terms. The easy exit was right there. But here's what stopped me. If I canceled, Lorraine would still have that room full of people on a Thursday night. She'd still have her paper and her script and Dennis sitting there ready to read whatever she handed him. And she'd tell the story without me in it. My absence would become the evidence. She didn't even show up. That's how selfish she is. 18 people would leave that restaurant having heard one version of Sophie Castellan, and I would spend the next decade untangling it. So let me ask you something. If you had those recordings on your phone and you knew exactly what was coming, would you have walked into that restaurant? Or would you have taken the easy exit and let her have the room? Tell me in the comments. The night before the graduation dinner I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. The sleeplessness wasn't dread. It was the kind of wakefulness that comes when your mind refuses to stop running the numbers. I lay in my apartment on Tate's Creek Road, staring at the ceiling, going over everything I knew. What Lorraine had planned. What Dennis didn't know he was about to read. What Dr. Wynne had already been told. What Priya knew. What Daniela didn't. 3 recordings on my phone and a dinner reservation at 7 o'clock the following evening. And somewhere across town my mother was probably sleeping just fine because she believed she had already won. I got up at 2 and sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water and my phone. I opened the recordings folder and listened to all 3 files back to back. Not because I needed to, I had them memorized by then, but because I wanted to make sure my own memory wasn't softening the edges. When you're close to something you start giving people benefit of the doubt they haven't earned. So I listened again. Lorraine's voice in the hallway. Lorraine's voice in the kitchen. Lorraine's voice on the phone upstairs, talking to Gerald about the $250 and the standing ovation and Dennis reading words at the table he'd never seen before. No softened edges. No room for interpretation. Just a woman who had spent weeks building a public moment designed to diminish her own daughter and handing her husband a script he didn't know he was holding. I closed the app. Drank my water. Went back to bed. Set my alarm for 7. Graduation morning was its own separate thing and I am grateful for that. I dressed alone in my apartment, drove to Rupp Arena where the university was holding the ceremony, found my seat in the second row of the nursing cohort and waited. When they called my name and I walked across that stage, I shook the dean's hand and I thought about exactly one thing. Not the dinner. Not Lorraine. I thought about the night 3 years earlier when I worked a double shift at the hospital, came home at midnight, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened a textbook for a pharmacology exam at 8 the next morning. I thought about that version of me and what she would think if she could see this moment. That's what I carried off that stage. Everything else could wait until 7 o'clock. Priya found me in the crowd after the ceremony. She hugged me, told me I looked good, then pulled back and looked at me with the expression she uses in professional settings when she's assessing a situation. "How are you actually?" she asked. I told her I was fine and meant it. She studied my face and nodded once. "Hey. Tonight we follow the plan. You don't signal anything before it starts. You let it run its course. And you don't reach for your phone until you're certain there's no other way through." I agreed. We'd talked through the logic twice already. Going in with the intention to use the recordings was the wrong frame. Going in with the intention to protect myself if I had no other option, that was the right one. The difference mattered, at least to me. Daniela caught up with us near the parking structure. She was carrying flowers, a small bouquet of yellow tulips she'd driven to a florist on Richmond Road to pick up that morning, and when she handed them to me she said, "I'm so proud of you," with the particular sincerity of someone who has watched you earn something from the very beginning and knows exactly what it cost. I told her about the dinner on the drive over. Not everything, not the recordings, not the full scope of what I knew. Just enough. I told her Lorraine had something planned that wasn't a standard celebration and that she should be prepared for the evening to get uncomfortable. Daniela looked at me from the passenger seat. "Do you want me to leave if it gets bad?" I shook my head. "I want you to stay exactly where you are no matter what happens." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Wait, I'm with you." That was enough. We arrived at Ramsey's at 6:45. What I haven't told you yet is what happened in the 20 minutes between my arrival and the moment Lorraine stood up with her paper. I was seated between Nana Rose and Daniela, which I was grateful for. Uncle Gerald was across from me, and I watched him carefully in those first few minutes. Gerald is not a cruel man by nature. He is, however, a man who has never once contradicted Lorraine Castellan, and I could see in the way he avoided my eyes when I sat down that he knew what was coming and had made his peace with letting it happen. Aunt Renata was 2 seats down from him, studying her menu with the focused attention of someone who is very deliberately not looking at the person across the table. She had been in that hallway conversation, had heard Lorraine map the evening out in detail, and had said nothing to me in the 3 weeks since. Not a word, not a text, not even a glance at the ceremony that morning. I noted all of it. Quietly, the way you note a patient's vitals when something isn't quite right but you can't say exactly what yet. Then I turned to Nana Rose and we talked about the ceremony and she told me about the dress she'd almost worn before deciding on the blue one, and for 10 minutes the table felt almost ordinary. Then Dennis arrived. He came in from the parking lot looking slightly rushed, still in his work jacket, and kissed Lorraine on the cheek before sitting down at the far end of the table. He caught my eye across the arrangement of water glasses and bread baskets and gave me a small nod, brief, slightly distracted, the nod of a man who is present in the room but absent from the occasion. I watched when he sat down, and I saw Lorraine lean toward him in the 2 seconds before he settled into his chair and slip a folded piece of paper into his jacket pocket with the quiet efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the handoff. Dennis didn't look at it. He reached for the bread basket instead. He had no idea what she'd just put on him. Dr. Wynne arrived at 6:58. She was gracious and warm, said hello to me first, told me she was glad to be there, and I watched Lorraine appear at her elbow within 30 seconds with a smile and a guided hand toward a specific seat. Not next to me. Across the table, angled slightly toward the head, with a clear sight line to exactly where Lorraine would be standing when she began. I noticed it. Priya 2 seats down noticed it too. Our eyes met for less than a second. I opened the recording app under the table. Set my phone face down next to my bread plate. The red bar began to pulse. And then Lorraine stood up. I've already told you what she said. What I want to tell you now is what it felt like to sit through it, because people who haven't been in a room like that won't underestimate what it costs to stay in your chair. Every instinct I had was signaling the same thing. Stand up. Correct this. Say something. The factual wrongness of what she was reading was almost physically uncomfortable, the way a misquoted statistic in a briefing makes your hand want to reach for the chart before the sentence is finished. But I didn't move. I sat with my hands in my lap and I let her finish because Priya had been right. If I interrupted, I became the evidence. If I stayed still, she had to keep talking. And the longer she talked, the more my phone recorded. When she sat down and picked up her menu, the table held that particular silence that follows something no one knows how to respond to. Then Dennis reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded the paper Lorraine had given him in the parking lot. I watched his eyes move across the first line. Something shifted in his face, too quick to name, and then he composed it and cleared his throat and began to read. His voice was flat in the way voices go flat when a person is reading something they haven't processed yet. He listed my failures like a man reading from a receipt, mechanical, slightly confused, eyes on the page rather than on me. He got through 2 paragraphs before I saw his hand tighten at the corner of the paper. He'd reached something that surprised him. He kept reading anyway because that's what Dennis Castellan does. He keeps going because stopping would mean deciding, and Dennis has spent 23 years avoiding decisions that belong to Lorraine. When he finished, he folded the paper and put it back in his pocket and didn't look up for a long moment. Nana Rose's hand found mine under the table. Her grip was firm, the way it had been at the ceremony that morning, the way it always was when she was telling me something she didn't need words for. I looked at my phone. The waveform was steady. Lorraine was watching me with the expression of a woman who believes she has just done something courageous. 18 people were waiting to see what I would do. Daniela's knee was pressed against mine under the table, a small, solid point of contact that said, "I'm here, I'm not leaving whenever you're ready." I took a breath. The kind I take at the start of a long shift when I'm deciding what kind of nurse I'm going to be that day. Deliberate. Grounding. I looked at Lorraine. Then I looked at Dennis. Then I looked at the 18 people in that room who had come expecting a celebration and gotten a trial instead. And I said very quietly, "Are you finished?" The silence that followed those 2 words was different from the silence after Lorraine sat down. That first silence had been collective, the kind a room absorbs when it wasn't prepared. This one was singular. It belonged to Lorraine and she didn't know what to do with it. Because, "Are you finished?" is not the response of someone who is breaking. It is the response of someone who has been waiting. And Lorraine had not planned for that. She recovered quickly. I'll give her that. She straightened in her chair, tilted her chin up slightly and said, "We're not finished, Sophie. Your father has more to say and so do I." I looked at Dennis. He was still looking at the table. Whatever was on that paper had unsettled him more than he was showing. He didn't pick it back up. Lorraine noticed. She reached across and touched his arm, a small directive gesture, the kind she uses when she wants Dennis to do something without making it look like a command. He cleared his throat. "There's a second page," he said without any real conviction. He unfolded the paper again, but his eyes weren't moving the way they had been. He was stalling. I let him stall. I had time. What I was watching in those few minutes, I don't think anyone else fully registered. Dennis had come believing he understood what this dinner was. Lorraine had told him it was a hard conversation the family needed to have, and he had agreed the way he always agreed, without reading the fine print. Sitting there with that paper in his hands, something was shifting behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly. More like the discomfort of a man realizing mid-performance that he doesn't believe his own lines. He read 4 more sentences. Then he stopped, folded the paper and set it on the table in front of him. "I think," he said slowly, "we've said what we came to say." Lorraine turned to look at him. Her expression stayed composed but her jaw tightened. She had not scripted an early exit for Dennis. "Gary," she said, using the name she only uses when she wants him to feel the weight of her expectation. He didn't pick the paper back up. He reached for his water glass instead. The table was completely still. 18 people watching a 3-way pause that no one had words for. Dr. Wynne had her hands flat on the tablecloth. Daniela hadn't moved. Priya was watching Lorraine with the focused calm of someone cataloging every detail for later. And Nana Rose, who had not said a single word since Lorraine stood up, slowly set down her fork with a sound that was somehow louder than anything else in the room. I stood up. Not dramatically. I pushed back my chair, got to my feet and waited for Lorraine to look at me. She did. "I'd like to respond," I said. "Is that allowed, or is this the kind of conversation where only one side gets to speak?" Someone in the middle of the table made a sound, not a laugh, something quieter and shorter, a sound of involuntary recognition. Uncle Gerald looked down at his bread plate. Aunt Renata's menu was still in her hands even though no one had ordered yet. Lorraine spread her hands in a gesture of open invitation. Go ahead, Sophie. This is exactly why we're all here. Say what you need to say. She sat back. She thought she had won the frame. She thought whatever I said next would either be an apology, a deflection, or an outburst, and all three of those options served her narrative. She had not considered option 4. I reached into my bag, took out my phone, set it on the table screen up, and looked at Lorraine directly. Before I say anything, I want to ask you one question. And I'd like you to answer it honestly in front of everyone here. She nodded. Did you call Dr. Wynne before tonight and tell her I had been struggling with my priorities and that the family had concerns about me? The table shifted. Dr. Wynne looked up. Lorraine's composure held, but only just. I introduced myself and gave her some context, yes. I nodded slowly. Context, I repeated. Okay. I looked at Dr. Wynne. I'm sorry you were contacted that way. You deserved better than that. She said nothing, but something in her expression shifted. She was recalibrating. I looked back at Lorraine. You've spent the last 20 minutes telling everyone at this table that I'm selfish, that I'm difficult, that I make everything about myself. You had my father read from a list you wrote. You pre-briefed my thesis advisor. You arranged this dinner on my graduation night specifically because you knew I couldn't walk away without it looking like proof of everything you'd just said. I paused. I know all of this because I've been in this family my entire life and I know how you operate. But I also know it because I've been listening. I opened the recordings folder on my phone. 3 weeks ago I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. And in the weeks after that I heard 2 more. I wasn't looking for any of it. But Kentucky is a one-party consent state, and I was present for every word. I looked at Lorraine. Her face had gone very still, the stillness of a person whose internal calculation is running too fast for her expression to keep up. I'm going to play the first one now. I'll give you the chance to stop me if you'd like to take this conversation somewhere private. Just the family. The offer was genuine. Even then, I did not want to do this in front of 18 people including my thesis advisor and my grandmother. I wanted the private version. I had always wanted the private version. Lorraine said, there's nothing on that phone that changes what we've said tonight. And that was the moment. That was the sentence that closed every other door. Not because it was defiant, because it was still a performance. She was still playing to the room. She still thought the room was hers. I looked at Priya. She gave me the smallest nod. I pressed play. Lorraine's voice came out of the phone speaker, clear and unhurried. The voice she'd been using all evening. We invite everyone, make it look like a celebration, and then we tell her exactly what this family has been dealing with. In front of people she respects. People she won't want to embarrass herself in front of. Then Renata's voice. And if she gets upset? Then Lorraine. Then everyone in that room sees exactly what we've been talking about. The recording stopped. 18 people in a steakhouse in Lexington, Kentucky, and not one of them made a sound. The only movement was Aunt Renata, who closed her eyes briefly then opened them, like someone bracing for the second half of a fall already in progress. Dennis turned to look at Lorraine. Not with anger, not yet. With the expression of a man who has just heard his wife say out loud something he had managed not to fully understand until this moment. You made it look like a celebration, he said. His voice was very quiet. That's what you told me it was. Lorraine started. Dennis, that's not the full. He held up one hand. A gesture I had never seen him make at a dinner table in my entire life. Lorraine stopped. I pressed play on the second file. This one was shorter. The kitchen conversation, Lorraine's voice telling me about Dr. Wynne with that practiced pleasantness, the context she'd wanted my thesis advisor to have. I watched Dr. Wynne as it played. I watched her face move through several expressions in quick succession. By the time the recording stopped, she had her bag on her lap. She wasn't leaving yet, but she was ready to. I looked at Lorraine. She was gripping the table edge with both hands, composure intact but only just. There's one more, I said. I looked at Uncle Gerald. He had gone the color of old chalk. He knew which conversation was coming. He had been on the phone. He had listened to Lorraine talk about the 250 and the standing ovation and Dennis reading lines he'd never rehearsed. He had said nothing. He had come to this dinner and taken his seat and eaten his bread roll and waited for the performance to unfold. Gerald looked at me, and for the first time all evening his expression was not avoidance. It was something closer to shame. I pressed play on the third file. Lorraine's voice filled the space between the water glasses and the centerpiece flowers. Dennis will go along with it. He always does. He hasn't read what I wrote. He'll read it at the table. The recording ended. Dennis sat completely motionless. The paper was still folded on the tablecloth. The paper with the words his wife had written and handed him in a parking lot and let him read aloud in front of 18 people without once telling him what it said or what it was for. He picked it up. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he set it back down and pushed it slowly across the table toward Lorraine. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The table understood that gesture with the totality of people witnessing a marriage do something it can't undo. Nana Rose let go of my hand. She straightened in her chair. And in a voice that was completely level and entirely without drama she said, "Lorraine, I think you should take your family home." It was the first thing she had said since Lorraine stood up. In all my years knowing her I had never heard her voice carry that particular tone. Not angry. Not sad. Just finished. A door closing quietly on its way to locked. I sat back down. The room was fractured. People looking at one another with the disorientation of an audience that arrived expecting one show and watched something else entirely. Dr. Wynne stood up, thanked me quietly for inviting her, and said she'd see me at the hospital on Monday. She did not say goodbye to Lorraine. Cole, who had been silent in his chair through the entire evening, was staring at the centerpiece like it owed him an explanation. I looked at Daniela. She reached over and covered my hand with hers. "Happy graduation," she said softly. And somehow, impossibly, I almost smiled. Nobody moved for what felt like a full minute after Nana Rose spoke. Then the room began to unspool in the quiet, incremental way that things fall apart when nobody wants to be the first to acknowledge they have. Chairs shifted. A purse was lifted from a floor. Coats were retrieved with the careful deliberateness of people who are trying to leave a space without making it worse than they found it. Two of my aunts, women I had known my entire life, women who had come to this dinner wearing their good jewelry and expecting a family moment to talk about at church, looked at each other across the table and said nothing because there was nothing adequate to say. Lorraine had not moved. She was still at the head of the table, both hands on the edge of it, watching the room empty the way someone watches water drain from a bathtub they had just filled. Gerald stood up slowly, pushed in his chair with the careful manners of a man who wants it noted that he behaved well at least in the final moment, and walked out without making eye contact with anyone. Renata followed him, and as she passed my chair she stopped for exactly 1 second. She didn't look at me. She put her hand on my shoulder briefly, the way you touch someone at a funeral when words have failed entirely, and then she kept walking. I don't know what that gesture meant to her. I know what it meant to me. It meant she had known for 3 weeks and done nothing, and now she was acknowledging that in the only language she had left. Dennis was still at the far end of the table. He hadn't stood up yet. He was looking at the space in front of him, the tablecloth, the folded paper Lorraine had pushed back toward her side after he'd slid it across. He was doing the same thing I had done in my apartment the night before, running the numbers. Except his numbers were 23 years long and the totals were coming out different than he had thought they would. Cole had finally stopped staring at the centerpiece and was watching his father with the wide, unmoored look of someone who has spent his entire life in a house with a specific gravitational center and just felt it shift. I was not watching any of this with satisfaction. I want to be honest about that because I think when people hear stories like this they assume there's a moment of triumph, a feeling of vindication that arrives like sunlight through a window. There wasn't. What I felt sitting in that chair was closer to exhaustion, the deep specific tiredness of someone who has been braced for impact for a very long time and is only now after the collision allowing their muscles to release. I had not wanted this dinner to go this way. I had not wanted any version of this evening to exist. What I had wanted, the thing I had been wanting for years without ever letting myself name it clearly, was just to be seen accurately by the people who were supposed to know me best. So, that's the whole of it. Daniela stayed beside me while the room cleared. She didn't try to fill the silence with reassurance. She just stayed, which was the only thing I actually needed. When most of the guests had filtered out, Priya came around the table and crouched beside my chair. She looked at me carefully. "Are you okay?" I told her what I had told her before the dinner. "I'm fine." She looked at me the same way she had before. Not quite believing it but deciding to accept it for now because there were more immediate things to manage. "Dennis is still here," she said quietly. I looked to the end of the table. He was right. He hadn't moved. Lorraine was standing a few feet away from him, talking to him in a low voice, her hand on his arm, the full deployment of 23 years of managing Dennis in the direction she needed him to go. I watched his face. He wasn't arguing. But he wasn't agreeing either, and for Dennis that was the closest thing to resistance I had ever seen from him. I stood up. I walked to the end of the table. Lorraine saw me coming and stopped talking. I looked at Dennis. "Dad." He looked up. "Whatever she's telling you right now, you don't have to decide anything tonight." He blinked. "You can take whatever time you need." His jaw worked for a moment. He nodded once, the same small nod he'd given me when he arrived, except this time it carried something different inside it. I turned to leave and Lorraine caught my arm. Not aggressively. Just her hand on my elbow, the same grip she'd used my entire childhood to steer me in the direction she'd already chosen. "We need to talk about this," she said. Her voice was lower now, the performance register gone, replaced with something more unguarded than I was used to hearing from her. "You just did all of that in front of people who know us, Sophie. Do you understand what you've done?" I looked at her hand on my arm and then at her face. "I played recordings of conversations that already happened," I said. "I didn't do anything in front of those people that you didn't do first." I removed her hand gently, the same way you'd move something fragile. "When you're ready to have a real conversation, not a scripted one, call me." I stepped back. She let me go. Outside, the evening air was cool and smelled like cut grass and car exhaust, the particular combination that belongs to Kentucky in late spring. I stood on the sidewalk outside Ramsey's and took 3 slow breaths. Inside, through the front window, I could see the shape of the dining room, the long table with its abandoned water glasses and untouched bread baskets, Lorraine still standing where I'd left her, very small through the glass. Daniela came out behind me and handed me my bag. Priya appeared a moment later. Neither of them spoke first. That was the right call. I was the one who finally broke the silence. "Nana Rose," I said. "I need to call Nana Rose." Priya handed me my phone. I dialed. It rang twice. "There's my girl," she said when she picked up, the same thing she had said at the beginning of the evening when everything was still intact, and I had to press my lips together for a second before I could answer. I told her I was outside. That I was okay. She made a small understanding sound and then she said, "Come see me Saturday." I told her I would. She said, "Bring butterscotch." I almost laughed. Almost. The 3 of us drove back toward my apartment in Priya's car. Nobody reviewed the evening, nobody catalogued what had happened or built a summary of who had done what. We just drove, windows cracked, the low hum of a radio station neither of us chose deliberately, and I sat in the back seat and watched the lights of Lexington move past. I thought about the version of this night I had imagined when my mother first called to tell me she was planning something special for graduation. I had pictured a restaurant, yes. I had pictured family and people I cared about gathered in the same room. I had pictured for about 5 minutes before I understood what it actually was, something that felt like being celebrated. I didn't get that. But somewhere in the rubble of the evening I had gotten something else, something harder to name but more durable. I had gotten proof, concrete and recorded and heard by 18 witnesses, that the story Lorraine had been telling about me for years was not the truth. I had gotten Nana Rose's voice on the phone saying "Come see me Saturday." I had gotten Daniela sitting beside me without trying to fix anything. I had gotten Dennis's face when he heard his wife's voice on that recording. The moment when the version of reality he had been maintaining at considerable personal cost finally stopped holding. We pulled into my apartment complex just after 10. Priya walked me to my door and hugged me in the hallway. "You did exactly what you needed to do and nothing more," she said. Daniela hugged me after and said she'd call in the morning. I told her to sleep in. She said she wouldn't. I knew she was right. I unlocked my door, went inside, set my bag on the counter. The apartment was exactly as I had left it that morning. Same furniture, same plant on the counter, same 2 meal prep containers in the refrigerator. Everything in the room was exactly the same and I was not. I sat on the edge of the couch and opened my phone. Not the recordings folder this time. My contacts. I scrolled to Dennis. I stared at his name for a long moment. Then I sent one message. Just 2 sentences. I meant everything I said tonight. Not to hurt anyone but because it was true. I put the phone face down on the cushion and sat in the quiet of my own apartment and let the evening finish arriving. I did not hear back from Dennis that night. I lay in the dark for a long time after, not reviewing the evening, not building arguments I would never get to use, just existing in the unusual quiet of a night that had asked everything of me and given me my answer. The apartment was small and dim and entirely mine. At some point I fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was coming through the gap in the curtains the way it always did, and outside my window Lexington was doing what it always did, completely indifferent to the Castellan family and everything it had produced the night before. But 3 days later, something happened that I didn't see coming. And that is where the real aftermath begins. 3 days after the graduation dinner, Dennis Castellan called me at 7 in the morning. Not a text. An actual phone call, which in our family's communication history was the equivalent of a formal declaration. Dennis communicated in nods and the absence of disagreement rather than the presence of support. A phone call before 8 meant something had broken through the surface of whatever he normally kept buried. I picked up on the second ring. He didn't say good morning. He said, "I want you to know I moved out." His voice was even but thin, the way voices go when someone has been awake for most of the night and is choosing words with the deliberate care of someone who knows they can't take them back. I sat up in bed. He told me he had packed 2 bags the evening before and was staying at a motel on Nicholasville Road while he figured out next steps. He had not argued with Lorraine. He had simply left. I asked if he was okay. He was quiet for a few seconds and then he said something I have turned over in my mind many times since. "I've been going along with things for a long time, Sophie." I didn't realize how long until I heard my own voice reading words I'd never seen before. He paused. "That's on me. Not just on her." I didn't fill the silence after that. I just let it hold. Before he hung up he said, "I'm sorry about the dinner." 4 words and he was gone. It was the first apology I had received from anyone in my family in longer than I could accurately measure. That same afternoon Cole called. I almost didn't answer. Cole and I had never been close in the way siblings on the outside of favoritism sometimes pull together. We had mostly existed in parallel, 2 children navigating the same household through different corridors, shaped differently by the same architecture. When I picked up he sounded younger than I expected. Not the carefully casual version of Cole I was used to, but something underneath that, unguarded and slightly lost. He said he'd been thinking about the dinner for 3 days, that he hadn't known about any of it. The plan, the recordings, none of it. He said he felt sick. I believed him. Cole has many qualities that are maddening, but deliberate cruelty has never been one of them. He had benefited from a dynamic he hadn't designed, and recognizing that is its own kind of reckoning. I told him I believed he hadn't known. I told him the conversation about what comes next between the 2 of us was one I was willing to have, but not yet. He said okay. He said he was sorry. That was twice in one day. I sat on my kitchen floor after and let myself feel the weight of it without immediately organizing it into something useful. The 4th relationship that ended that night was the one I hadn't expected. 2 weeks after the dinner my Aunt Renata called. Not Lorraine's side. My father's sister, a woman who had been a steady and quiet presence at every family gathering I could remember, who had always existed slightly apart from Lorraine's gravitational pull in the way that in-laws sometimes manage when they've decided not to engage. She told me she had spoken to Dennis. She told me she had also spoken to Lorraine once 2 days after the dinner. She told me that conversation had ended with Lorraine saying anyone who wasn't supporting the family was choosing Sophie's side, and Renata had told her calmly that she didn't consider the truth to have sides. Lorraine had hung up. Renata had not called back. She told me all of this in the direct, unadorned way of someone filing a report rather than seeking a reaction. Then she said, "I just wanted you to know that some of us saw exactly what that dinner was. And I'm sorry it happened on the night it happened." I thanked her and meant it. We have spoken twice since, short conversations about ordinary things, and it has been the most functional relationship I have had with anyone on that side of the family in years. Lorraine called me 11 times in the 2 weeks following the dinner. I answered on the 14th day. Not because I had softened, but because avoiding the conversation indefinitely was its own kind of unfinished business, and I did not want to carry unfinished business into the next version of my life. He talked for a long time. She told me she had been trying to help me, that the dinner came from a place of genuine concern, that she had watched me pull away from the family for years and had felt helpless. Some of it was probably true. That is the complicated part of a story like this. The people who hurt you rarely believe themselves to be the villain. Lorraine had constructed a version of events in which she was a mother doing a difficult and courageous thing. And inside that version everything she had done made sense. The planning, the scripting, the advance call to Dr. Wynne, the graduation night timing. In her version, all of it was love expressed with urgency. I listened without interrupting. When she finished I said, "I hear you. I believe you think that's what it was. But the recording of your voice planning that evening is not something I can interpret as love. And until you can look at those recordings and tell me honestly what they sound like to you, we don't have a foundation to build anything on." She started to respond and I said, "I'm not ending this conversation, Mom. I'm ending this version of it. Call me when you're ready for the real one." I hung up. She has not called back since. That was 6 weeks ago. The line is open. Neither of us has walked through it yet. Here is where everyone ended up. Dennis is in a one-bedroom apartment 4 miles from the house he lived in for 23 years. He is going to counseling, which I found out through a text that said simply, "Started seeing someone to talk to, thought you should know." I sent back 3 words. "Good for you." I meant them without reservation. We have had dinner once, the 2 of us at a diner on Richmond Road, and we talked about ordinary things for 90 minutes. There is distance between us that will take time. But there is also for the first time something honest in it. Cole is still living at home with Lorraine. I don't hold that against him. He is 21 and the road from understanding that a dynamic was unfair to actually dismantling your own place within it is longer for some people than others. We have texted a handful of times. He sent me a photo of a dog he's been considering adopting. I told him to go for it. It was the most normal exchange we have had in years and it felt like the beginning of something, though I am not yet sure what. Renata and Gerald have quietly distanced from Lorraine in the way that extended family members do when a line has been crossed that can't be unseen. No confrontation, no formal announcement. Just a gradual lessening of presence. Gerald has not called me. I have not called him. That silence is not resolution. It is simply where we are. Lorraine still lives in the house on the east side. She goes to church on Sundays. I do not know if she has told people her version of what happened that night. He probably has. That used to be something that would have kept me awake. 18 people know what they witnessed. I can't control what Lorraine says to the 19th. Dr. Wynne stopped by my unit on my 3rd shift back at the hospital. She didn't make a production of it. She just appeared beside me during a charting break, handed me a coffee and said, "For what it's worth, the letter of recommendation stands." I thanked her. She nodded and walked back down the hall. That was it. That was enough. As for me, I am still in my apartment on Tate's Creek Road. I still drive the same car. I still eat meal prep during the week and I still visit Nana Rose on Saturdays, except now I stay longer because there is no Sunday dinner to rush back for. We do the crossword. He tells me about Grandpa Lou. I bring butterscotch and she pretends to be surprised every time. Last Saturday she held my hand and said, "You have always known who you are. The problem was letting other people tell you otherwise." I didn't say anything. I just squeezed her hand and let it be the truest thing in the room. Here is what I know now that I didn't fully know before. Belonging is not the same as being claimed. My family claimed me for 23 years. Claimed my labor and my money and my patience and my willingness to keep showing up and setting the table and absorbing the silence where gratitude should have been. They claimed all of it and called it family. But belonging, real belonging, is something you feel in the absence of performance. It is Daniela handing me yellow tulips on graduation morning. It is Priya asking, "How are you actually?" It is Nana Rose saying "There's my girl" when she picks up the phone. It is not a dining room rearranged with an agenda and a paper full of someone else's grievances. I graduated on a Thursday. By Monday I was back in the hospital doing the work I spent 4 years preparing for. That morning I walked onto my unit, picked up my first chart and felt something I can only describe as alignment. The specific rightness of being in the place you built yourself for. Nobody had handed me that morning. Nobody had written it on a piece of paper and read it aloud in a restaurant. I had made it myself quietly without applause in the way that the strongest things usually get made. My name is Sophie Castellan. I am a registered nurse in Lexington, Kentucky. I pay my own bills, I keep my own hours, and I visit my grandmother every Saturday. 4 relationships ended the night of my graduation dinner. And the life that began in the quiet after that is the one I would have chosen if anyone had ever thought to ask me. If this story made you feel something, Don't just scroll away. There are so many stories out there that never get told, and here on Confire Stories we bring them to life. So if you enjoy emotional, real-life drama like this, take a second to subscribe and be part of the journey. And if you've ever been in a situation like this, or have a story of your own, share it in the comments. I read them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.